This year, I moved to a pretty big city in California. I grew up in a rural area, so I felt a little out of place amidst all the people. Everything felt so overwhelming. Thankfully, I rented a room from a really nice guy named Grant who helped me settle in and make some new friends. Grant and I had almost nothing in common. He came from an extremely rich family, while I lived most of my life on a farm. He invited me to parties and stuff, but I always felt self-conscious. Rich people could take one look at me and know that I wasn't one of them. For New Year's, he invited me to his friend's party in some swanky high-rise. It was definitely not my scene, so I told him I had other plans. But I didn't have other plans. For New Year's, I was alone in my room, watching South Park in my pajamas. By around 10 o'clock, I started to feel really lonely. I didn't move all this way just to stay locked up in my room, especially on New Year's, the one night of the year where everyone in the world celebrates together. I texted Grant to see if I was still invited to the party. He responded with a video message of him surrounded by a crowd of beautiful people. I couldn't hear what he was saying to me. The music was too loud. Judging by his expression, though, I knew he was telling me to join them. He'd already sent me the address, so I quickly changed into something presentable and headed out. I had to check in with the security guard at the lobby, who knew right away that I was going to a party. As I was getting in the elevator, I heard a loud crash outside the building. I couldn't see what it was, though. I took the elevator up to the 15th floor. There were 3 apartments on that floor, and I was looking for the door to apartment C. For some reason, that door was already open. It didn't sound like a party was going on in there, though. I looked inside, and the place was empty. There were signs of a party, like empty cups and plates of finger food, but no people. "Hello?" I called. The apartment was deathly silent. I stepped inside and looked around. The sliding glass door to the balcony was open, letting cold air rush in. No one was on the balcony either. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a feeling that I'd been set up. Grant was playing some rich guy prank on me. He gave me the wrong address. He was probably at the real party right now, laughing at me with all his friends. I felt a surge of anger as I walked back to the elevator. A short old man was already inside. He smiled at me. "Going down?" he asked. I nodded. I wasn't in the mood to talk with anyone. He didn't take the hint, though. "All your friends have left the party," he muttered. "Do you know where they went?" I asked. All he said was down. I felt very uncomfortable standing next to him. Without realizing what I was doing, I jabbed at the button to the next floor. I figured I would take the stairs for the rest of the way down. "Is this your stop?" the man asked. I ignored him and rushed out of the elevator. Thankfully, he didn't follow. I went to the stairwell and started walking down the remaining 4 floors. I was able to hear police sirens from outside. There were lots of voices, too. I couldn't see what was happening until I reached the next floor. There was a small window I could look out. I saw police lights flashing and a circle of people gathering in the parking lot just below me. They were looking at a pile of clothes on the pavement. At least, that's what I thought. I needed to get a better look. I raced down to the next floor and stared out of the window. Now I could see clearly. It wasn't a pile of clothes. It was a pile of bodies. And one of those bodies was someone I recognized. It was Grant. That's when it all clicked into place. Those were all people at the party. They'd fallen from the balcony, but how? I continued down to the ground floor, both confused and horrified. I knew that the police would tell me what was happening. I walked out into the lobby and immediately saw 2 policemen. They had pinned someone to the ground, screaming at him. I got closer and saw that it was the man I'd met on the elevator. One of the police got right in his face and screamed, "Why did you do it?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head so he could look at me right in the eyes. He whispered. The party was too loud. I had to stop them. As they cuffed him and led him away, he kept looking directly at me. Then they were gone. I walked out of the building. I think the security guard told me something, but I was too numb to hear it. I stepped into the cold night air, still processing what I'd seen. Grant was dead. Lots of innocent people were too. All because their party was too loud for the neighbors. If I had arrived any earlier, I would be dead too.
The text came on Christmas Eve, just as the last of the holiday cheer faded from my dimly lit apartment. My handler, Clark, doesn't waste words. His messages are as efficient as the assignments he sends. 200K. Name, Joseph Tanner. Deadline, before New Year's. Usual arrangement. $200,000. It was high, even for me. Enough to make me suspicious. But you don't ask questions in this line of work. You do the job, you take the money, you disappear. Joseph Tanner. The file came the next morning. 48 years old, accountant, lived alone in a decrepit high-rise on the east side. The kind of guy who'd get a Christmas card from his bank before he'd get one from a person. No family, no friends, a loner. Should have been easy. The rain started on the 29th, freezing into a slick sheen on the sidewalks. Tanner's apartment was on the 6th floor, corner unit. It gave him a decent view of the city, I guessed, but also made him vulnerable. I'd scouted the building earlier that day. No cameras in the stairwells, no nosy neighbors, just the smell of mildew and desperation clinging to the walls. At 11:45 p.m., I climbed the fire escape, gun holstered under my jacket, and peered through his window. Tanner was sitting at a cheap desk typing on a laptop. He didn't look like much, just a tired man with a bad comb-over and a sweater 2 sizes too big. I slid the window open quietly, stepping inside. Tanner froze, his hands hovering above the keyboard. He turned slowly, his face pale. "You're him, aren't you?" His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew why I was there. I pulled out my gun, leveling it at his chest. "You know what's coming. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He smiled. It wasn't fear or defiance. It was something else. Confidence. "You might want to rethink that," he said, turning the laptop around. On the screen was a paused video. The resolution wasn't great, but it didn't need to be. The man in the video was me, in a motel room, going bang-bang with someone who wasn't my wife. My stomach dropped. "What the hell is this?" "It's called insurance," Tanner said, leaning back in his chair. "If anything happens to me, this video goes straight to everyone, including her, automatically. I set it up to send if I don't log in every 12 hours. He was lying. He had to be lying. "You don't even know who I am," I said, trying to regain control. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Mr. Diaz," he replied, his voice calm. "I also know where your wife works, where your son goes to school, and what time you go to the gym every morning." A bead of sweat slid down my back. He was bluffing. He had to be bluffing. "You think this scares me?" I asked, pressing the gun harder against his chest. "No," he said. "I think this complicates things. You're a professional, and professionals don't let personal matters interfere with business. But this," he gestured to the laptop, "this isn't business. This is personal." I clenched my jaw, my finger hovering over the trigger. All I had to do was pull. One quick shot. One more dead man in a city full of them. But if he was telling the truth... "You've got 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't kill you right now," I said. "Because I can give you something better," Tanner said quickly. I didn't lower the gun. "Keep talking." "Clark, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Your handler. He sent you to kill me because I know things. Things that could ruin him. You kill me, the information dies with me. But if you let me live, I can give you everything. Names, accounts, offshore holdings. Enough to make Clark disappear forever. He was stalling, buying time. But the mention of Clark made me hesitate. What do you have on Clark? I asked. Tanner smiled again. Not until I know you're serious. Lower the gun and I'll show you. I didn't trust him, but I didn't trust Clark either. Slowly, I lowered the gun. Tanner let out a shaky breath, then turned the laptop back around. He typed quickly, pulling up a folder filled with documents, spreadsheets, and emails. Clark's been laundering money for years, Tanner said. Through shell companies, fake accounts, the works. He's been using people like you to clean up his messes, tying up loose ends. You are just another tool in his kit. I scrolled through the files. Tanner wasn't lying. What do you want? I asked. Protection, he said. You let me live, and I'll give you everything you need to take Clark down. You'll be free of him. No more hits. No more blood on your hands. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to walk away from this life. To go home to my wife and son and pretend I was someone else. Someone better. But I couldn't. You don't get it, do you? I said, raising the gun again. Tanner's face fell. Wait, no, you don't have to do this. I don't have a choice. I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small apartment. Tanner slumped forward. His eyes stared blankly at the screen, where the incriminating video was still paused. I grabbed the laptop, yanking the power cord and shutting it. If the video was set to send, I couldn't risk leaving the device behind. As I climbed back down the fire escape, I told myself it was the right decision. Tanner was a liability. Clark would have killed me if I'd let him live. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't free. I'd never be free. When I got home that night, I placed the laptop on the table and began searching for any evidence of the file Tanner claimed existed. My hands moved mechanically, deleting folder after folder, scrubbing the hard drive clean. The work felt endless. But as I stared at the blank screen at 3 a.m., I thought I'd won. That was when I heard it. A chime. Faint but distinct. It came from my wife's phone on the nightstand. My blood froze. I walked into the bedroom as casually as I could manage, but my wife was already sitting up, the screen casting a pale glow on her face. She looked at me, then at the phone. Her expression twisted, disbelief giving way to hurt, then anger. "What the hell is this, Miguel?" she demanded, holding the phone up. My mind raced. She'd seen it. Tanner's video. Somehow, despite everything, the file had sent itself again. Let me explain, I stammered, but the words fell flat. Her silence was worse than her yelling. She grabbed her phone, shoved past me, and left the bedroom. Minutes later, the front door slammed. When I checked the phone, I saw the timestamp. Tanner's dead man switch had already sent the video to her, scheduled to send every 12 hours unless stopped. I was too late. By morning, she was gone, and I knew she wasn't coming back. The laptop sat uselessly on the table, a symbol of all the lies I'd built my life on. Tanner may have been dead, but he'd won.
"5 years ago, my family's ranch outside Palm Springs was the perfect escape for vacationers. But that wasn't why I let Robert book it. From the moment I saw his profile picture next to hers, the woman with the long brown hair and warm smile, I knew this was my chance. I didn't hate Robert from the start, not entirely. At first, he was just a means to an end, someone to get her here. But the moment we met in person, I realized how insufferable he was. The smug way he smiled, as if the world owed him something. The way he acted like this was all his idea, like he'd orchestrated every moment. I've always had a good poker face, though. I smiled, played along, and offered them the tour. It wasn't hard to make him think I was charmed by him. Men like him always believe they're irresistible. She, on the other hand, was everything I imagined and more. Her soft-spoken questions, the way her eyes lit up when she saw the barn, the slight hesitation in her voice when she introduced herself. It wasn't just her appearance that mirrored mine. It was something deeper, a kindred spirit, a reflection of everything I'd always wanted but could never have. I'd planned every detail for weeks. The barn, the lights, even the music. Robert thought he'd come up with the idea to decorate it as a romantic gesture. What a fool. He didn't realize I was feeding him the idea every step of the way. He was a puppet, and I held the strings. When she asked if Robert and I knew each other, I almost laughed. Of course we knew each other, but not in the way that she thought. He was just the bridge to her. Still, I could see her suspicion growing. The way her eyes darted between us, the faint crease in her brow. I had to tread carefully. That night, as Robert climbed out of bed to meet me in the barn, I felt a rush of excitement. The plan was finally coming together. But as we set up the last of the decorations, he started talking about her, about how much he loved her, about the ring he'd bought. My stomach turned. It was nauseating, hearing him talk about her like she was his possession. He didn't deserve her. No one did, except me. When she stormed into the barn, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. She was supposed to be asleep, but seeing her standing there, her eyes blazing with anger, was thrilling. This was my moment to show her who Robert really was, to make her see he wasn't worth her trust. But before I could say anything, she confronted me, accused me of sleeping with him. I didn't deny it. I let her think what she wanted. I needed her to turn her anger on him. But when she shoved me, something snapped. I'd spent my whole life being underestimated, pushed around, overlooked. Not this time. The fight was brutal, raw. She was stronger than I expected, but I had the advantage of desperation. When she twisted my foot and I fell, I knew I couldn't afford to lose. Not now. Not when I was so close. But then, everything changed. The tree stump, the crunch. She stood there frozen, staring at me like she'd just woken up from a nightmare. Robert came out then, his face pale as a sheet. He didn't even look at me. All his attention was on her. He started accusing her, his voice rising in panic. And that's when I realized he'd never protect her, not really. The moment things got tough, he'd throw her under the bus to save himself. I couldn't let that happen. While they argued, I grabbed the heavy lantern hanging by the barn door. Robert didn't see it coming. One swing, and he crumpled to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. She turned to me, her face a mix of horror and confusion. "Why?" she whispered. "Because he didn't deserve you. But now, we can finally be together." She backed away, shaking her head. "You're insane." "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not." I admitted. "But I did this for you, don't you see? He was holding you back. He didn't appreciate you like I do." She tried to run, but I was faster. I grabbed her wrist, pulled her close. She fought me, but I held on. "You'll understand eventually," I said. "You'll see that this is what's best for both of us." That was 5 years ago. She's still here, still mine. It took time, but she stopped fighting. Now, when we play in our cozy barn, she's almost at peace. She'll never leave. She knows she can't. And if anyone ever comes looking for Robert or Nadia, well, this property is enormous. It's amazing what you can hide when you have enough space. Meeting Janice was like stumbling onto a hidden treasure. We found each other in one of those obscure Reddit forums where people shared their quirks without judgment. She wasn't just beautiful, she was bored, trapped in a routine and starving for attention. Her loneliness resonated with mine, and our connection quickly turned into something electric. When she first invited me to her house, I was nervous but exhilarated. The thrill of sneaking around, the stolen moments, it was addictive. Over the weeks, we'd carved out a strange but passionate rhythm. It was never just about the feat. It was about being seen, being wanted, and breaking free of constraints. Janice was a storm, and I was happy to be swept up in her chaos. But that day, everything unraveled. I arrived at the house, parking my car far down the street as usual. Inside, Janice greeted me with a nervous energy that I'd never seen before. She said her husband had been acting strange, but she assured me he wouldn't be home until late. I should have listened to my gut when it told me to leave, but I didn't. I was too lost in her allure. We began as we always did, her lying on the plush carpet, me lost in the moment. She even brought out new heels, as if trying to distract us both from her growing unease. Then, I heard the heavy footsteps on the porch. Janice froze. Her eyes darted to the window, and I turned just in time to see her husband's shadow pass by. Before I could react, the door flew open. There he was, looking every bit the stern, no-nonsense businessman Janice had described. He stared at us in disbelief, his face contorting between rage and confusion. I expected him to lash out, but instead, he shouted, "What the hell?" Janice was gagged and tied, her suggestion, as always, but now she was silent, terrified. I had to think fast. "She's lonely," I blurted out, standing up slowly. "She needed someone. You weren't there for her." He looked ready to explode. I thought he might attack me, but he just stood there, ordering me to leave. I could tell he wasn't a fighter, but I wasn't about to walk away like some coward, not after everything Janice and I had shared. So I pushed him. Not physically, not yet, but enough to assert my place. I grabbed one of the stockings from the table, a playful gesture, or so I thought. But when he lunged at me, instincts took over. The stocking stretched tight in my hands, and before I knew it, I had it wrapped around his neck. "Stay back!" I hissed, pulling tighter. Janice didn't say a word. She just stared, her wide eyes betraying a cocktail of fear and fascination. Maybe she liked the chaos. Maybe she didn't know how to stop it. Either way, she let it happen. But then, the police stormed in. The officers came out of nowhere. One yanked me off her husband, the other untied Janice. I tried to explain myself, but they weren't interested. They cuffed me on the spot. And as I was being dragged away, I saw them cuffing Janice too. That's when I realized there was more to this than I knew. The police didn't take us to the station right away. Instead, they kept us in separate cars while they talked to someone on the porch. Through the window, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Older, disheveled, with a nervous energy that set me on edge. He glanced at me once and then quickly looked away. Later, I learned his name, Bruce. In the interrogation room, the truth began to unravel. Bruce wasn't just the former owner of the house. He'd never truly left. The Ring camera was just the beginning. He'd installed hidden cameras all over the property, watching Janice and her husband from the shadows. He knew everything. Our affair, the stolen money, even the intimate moments Janice had shared with her husband before things fell apart. And then, there was the blackmail. Bruce had been bleeding Janice dry, threatening to reveal her secrets unless she paid him off. But it didn't stop there. The missing valuables, the drained accounts, all part of Bruce's twisted game. He'd orchestrated everything, turning their lives into his personal soap opera. And when things got too messy, he called the cops. Not out of guilt, but to tie up loose ends. I sat there, stunned, as the officers pieced it together. Bruce was the real criminal. But he was clever. He'd left no evidence linking himself to the thefts or the cameras. He walked away scot-free, while Janice and I were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered narrative. I never saw Janice again after that day. I heard through whispers that her husband filed for divorce and moved out of the house. As for Bruce, he sold the place to another unsuspecting family and disappeared. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the Ring camera. How many other lives had Bruce watched, manipulated, and destroyed? And how many more would follow before his twisted games were finally exposed? The cameras never stopped recording.
My name is Oliver. Last summer, I was staying with my parents while my landlord fumigated my apartment. I could have stayed with my girlfriend Tiana, but I really hadn't seen my family in a long time. Besides, I knew that my little brother Benjamin was coming back home after his first year in college. I figured this would be a good opportunity to reconnect with all of them. I arrived in the afternoon and got to catch up with my parents. We talked for a couple hours, and I was happy to know that they seemed to be doing well. They asked about Tiana and about my job, and I asked them about their church friends. I tried to ask how Benjamin was doing, but I guess he hadn't talked to them that much in the past year either. He ghosted all of us apparently, but I guess that's to be expected. It was his first year out of the house after all. Eventually, Mom went to the kitchen to start dinner, and Dad and I watched football on TV. It was nice to be back home. It was relaxing. And then Benjamin arrived. He looked about the same as before, though he was wearing these weird spiky boots and a trench coat, something he never would have worn before. But there was something else about him, a darkness in his eyes. He'd changed in the last year, but I didn't know how. I'd find out soon enough. He hugged me and asked how I was doing. I told him about my job and my girlfriend Tiana. He seemed pretty supportive, but then he asked if he could see a photo of her. I showed him, and his expression instantly dropped. "You're dating her?" he asked. "What's wrong with that?" I asked. I didn't think that she was out of my league or anything. We were both pretty good-looking people, but then I realized that his negative response was because my girlfriend was black. For the next hour or so, there was an awkwardness between us. Even Dad noticed, and he never noticed anything. As we ate dinner, Mom suggested that Benjamin and I get out of the house and catch up over drinks or something. I wasn't sure that was a good idea, but Benjamin loved the idea. He said that he discovered this awesome bar that would help me learn a bit about myself. I didn't know what he meant by that. So after dinner, Benjamin and I got in his car and he drove me to this pretty shady area in town. He pulled up to this run-down bar that didn't even have a sign on the building. We had the only car in the parking lot. Everyone else had come here on motorcycle. "I don't know if I like this place," I said. "Trust me," he said. "You need to come here." I didn't want to let my brother down, so I followed him in. Right away, I knew I'd made a mistake. The place was filled with the sketchiest looking people, all men. Most of them had shaved heads. All of them had tattoos. Benjamin walked up to two burly guys at the bar and introduced me. They all said hello, but they looked at me like I was trespassing on their property. Then Benjamin asked me to take out my phone and show them my girlfriend's photo. I refused. I didn't know these people, and I certainly didn't want them to know anything about me or Tiana. Out of nowhere, Benjamin slammed me against the wall and stole my phone. He showed them the same photo as before, and all his buddies were horrified. They started lecturing me about the master race and bloodlines, and the most horrific stuff. That's when I knew for sure this was a skinhead bar. Sometime last year, my brother had gotten infected by their twisted ideology. He was one of them now. Benjamin still held me against the wall so I could listen to his psycho friends without being able to escape. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked. "To knock some sense into you," he said. "Either you preserve our family name or break up with her, or..." "Dude, no!" I screamed. "I love her, man. You're insane." He did not like being called insane. He started screaming a bunch of racist nonsense that he picked up over the last year. It was disgusting. And when he ran out of words, he pulled a switchblade out of his pocket and held it up to my cheek. He said that if I didn't preserve our family line, whatever that meant, he'd cut me so that no woman would ever find me attractive again. The two guys behind him just watched and smiled. I could tell he meant business. I could also tell he was not going to listen to reason. The only thing I could do was run. So I kicked him as hard as I could, right in the... The knife fell out of his hand and doubled over. All the other guys in the bar stared at me, but none of them moved. I raced out of there and ran all the way back to my parents' house because Benjamin had driven me there and I didn't have a ride. I knew that it was about a 20-minute walk, but because I was running the whole time, I got there in 10. As soon as I got inside, I ran to my parents in the kitchen and told them everything that happened. I must have sounded like a crazy person because the words just came out of me. When I finished, Mom and Dad stared at me for a long time. They looked at each other and then burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" I said. He threatened me. He's a skinhead." My mom stepped closer and wrapped me in a big hug. "It's okay," she said. Benjamin already told us what really happened. That's when Benjamin walked out of the other room. He'd gotten home before I did. I asked him what he said, and apparently he told our parents that I drank too much and started flirting with a girl who wasn't interested. When I got rejected, I started crying and ran out of the bar. "But that's not what happened at all," I screamed. It's okay, Mom said. "We promise not to tell your girlfriend." I kept trying to explain the truth, but no one would believe me. I guess the thought of me getting rejected seemed a whole lot more believable than my brother being a racist psychopath. Eventually, I stopped arguing with them and went to my room. I called Tiana and told her what happened, and of course, she believed me. That night, I left my parents' house and went to stay at her place. My family called me a bunch of times after that, asking if I was coming back, but I told them I would not step foot in that house as long as Benjamin was there. Since then, Benjamin went back to college, and who knows what awful kinds of stuff he's learning now. I've seen my parents a handful of times, but they still don't believe me. I still have no idea how to change their minds.